Grandma, the nursing home is 2 blocks down. Brandon's voice sliced through Summit Arms like a blade. 20 customers turned to stare at the 67-year-old woman in the doorway. Eleanor Hayes stood there with trembling hands and silver-streaked hair, wearing a faded cardigan that had seen better decades. 20 people laughed. 20 phones came out. 20 strangers decided she was worthless before she took a single step. None of them knew that in exactly 43 minutes, the CEO of this company would burst through those doors, drop to his knees, and call her ma'am, with tears streaming down his face. If stories about respect, dignity, and hidden strength matter to you, subscribe now and follow this story to the very end. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's see what happens next. The glass door of Summit Arms hadn't even closed behind Eleanor Hayes when the first insult hit her like a slap. Holy crap, did someone leave the door to the retirement home open? Brandon Cole's voice carried across the entire store. 26 years old with slicked back blonde hair, a jawline he thought made him look like a movie star, and the kind of smirk that had never been knocked off his face. Eleanor stood in the doorway. 67 years old, silver-streaked brown hair in a practical bun, wire-rimmed glasses, faded cardigan with a small coffee stain, orthopedic shoes, and hands that trembled with a rhythm she couldn't control. She looked like someone's grandmother who'd wandered in by mistake. Brandon saw easy prey. "Can I help you find the exit, sweetheart?" He pushed off from the counter, swagger in every step. "This is a gun store. You know, bang, bang." He made finger guns at her. Pew, pew, any of this ringing a bell. Laughter exploded from the group of young men near the ammunition display. 4 of them all wearing expensive tactical vests they'd never use for anything except Instagram photos. "Dude, she looks so confused," one of them snorted. "Someone call her grandkids." Nana escaped again. Eleanor took 3 steps forward. Her orthopedic shoes made no sound on the polished concrete. Her trembling hands hung at her sides. Brandon's smirk widened. This was going to be fun. "Ma'am, seriously." He held up his hands in mock concern. "I don't want you to hurt yourself. These are real guns, not the kind you see on TV during your afternoon naps." A woman in designer athleisure wear whipped out her phone. Perfectly styled blonde hair. Gucci sunglasses pushed up on her head. Lips that had seen too much filler. "Oh my God, this is gold," she whispered to her friend, hitting record. Confused grandma walks into gun store. Hashtag Karen alert. Hashtag wrong turn. Her friend giggled. "Put it on TikTok. This is going viral for sure." Eleanor's gray-blue eyes swept across the room. 20 people. 12 men, 8 women. All staring, all smirking, all certain they knew exactly what she was. She'd been underestimated before. She could wait. "I'd like to see a rifle," she said quietly. Brandon clutched his chest in fake shock. She speaks, and she wants to see a rifle. He turned to his audience, arms spread wide. "Did everyone hear that Grandma wants to see a rifle?" More laughter, louder now. The audience was warming up. A heavy-set man in a polo shirt too tight for his belly called out, "Show her the pink one, old ladies love pink." "Nah, show her a water gun," another voice added. "Less dangerous when she drops it." Brandon walked toward Eleanor with exaggerated slowness, like he was approaching a confused child. "Okay, Grandma, I'll bite. Which rifle caught your eye?" "We have some very nice beginner models. Small, lightweight, won't hurt your arthritis too much." Eleanor pointed toward the premium display case. "Third case, second rifle from the left." "That one." Brandon's eyebrows shot up. He looked where she was pointing and burst out laughing. "That one, are you serious right now?" He turned to share the joke with everyone. "She wants to see the Barrett, the $75,000 Barrett." The laughter doubled. Someone actually applauded. "Honey," Brandon said, wiping fake tears from his eyes, "that rifle costs more than your Social Security pays in 3 years. That's not a grandma gun. That's not a bingo prize. That's for serious shooters." "I am a serious shooter." 4 words, delivered quietly, no emotion. The laughter flickered for just a moment. Something in her voice didn't match the cardigan, didn't match the trembling hands, didn't match anything they expected. But Brandon had an audience to entertain. Right, and I'm a Navy SEAL." He rolled his eyes dramatically. My grandmother was in Delta Force. My great-aunt invented the atomic bomb. He looked at the tactical vest bros. You guys buying any of this? Not a word, bro. She probably thinks Call of Duty is real life. Ask her what her KD ratio is. Brandon turned back to Eleanor, hands on his hips. Look, I'm going to level with you. I don't know how you wandered in here. Maybe you were looking for the pharmacy. Maybe the craft store. But this isn't the place for you. These weapons are for people who know what they're doing. He pointed at her trembling hands. And those shaky hands, that's a liability waiting to happen. You'd probably shoot yourself trying to load a magazine. Eleanor's hands continued their rhythmic tremor. Her expression didn't change. The rifle, she said again. Please. Oh, she said please. How adorable. Brandon clutched his heart. Tell you what, Grandma, since you asked so nicely, I'll let you look at the big scary gun. But don't blame me when you can't even lift it. He pulled out his keys, jangling them mockingly as he walked toward the display case. Hey, someone get their camera ready. This is going to be hilarious. Old lady versus 30-pound rifle. My money's on the rifle. The woman in athleisure adjusted her phone angle. I'm getting all of this. This is content gold. From the back of the store, a door opened. James Harrington emerged from the inventory room. Late 40s, salt and pepper hair and a military cut. The kind of posture that 20 years in the Marines carved into your bones. He'd heard the commotion. Expected a typical customer complaint. Someone unhappy with prices. Maybe a return dispute. What he saw stopped him cold. Not the mocking, not the phones out recording, not even Brandon's performance. Eleanor Hayes had pulled something from her jacket pocket, something small and metallic, worn smooth from years of handling. A challenge coin. James knew challenge coins. He had a drawer full of them at home. Every unit, every deployment, every buddy who'd served beside him. But he'd never seen this one in person. Only in photographs. Only in classified briefings. Only in the kind of files that required security clearances most people didn't know existed. The unit insignia on that coin didn't officially exist. Brandon hadn't noticed. He was too busy playing to his crowd, fumbling with the display case keys. All right, moment of truth, he announced. Let's see if Grandma can even pick this thing up without falling over. He swung the case open with a flourish. The Barrett rifle gleamed under the display lights. Black metal, precision engineering, $75,000 of military-grade killing power. There she is, Brandon said proudly. The beast, the monster, the gun that shoots through walls, through cars, through Barrett M82A1, modified CQ variant. Eleanor's voice cut through his monologue like a scalpel. Brandon blinked. What? Titanium firing pin instead of steel. Magazine capacity reduced from 10 to 7 rounds for optimal weight distribution. Barrel length 20 inches, not the standard 29. Serial number should begin with CQB47. Silence. Complete and total silence. Brandon's mouth hung open. The tactical vest bros had stopped laughing. The woman with the phone had lowered it slightly. The buffer spring has been modified to reduce recoil by approximately 12%. Eleanor continued, her voice calm, clinical. Custom barrel coating, tungsten disulfide if I'm not mistaken, not available in civilian models. Never has been. Brandon's face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching fear. How do you know that? He demanded. Open the case all the way. Let me see the action. I'm not opening anything until you tell me. Brandon, James's voice cracked across the store like a whip. Open the case. Now, give her the rifle. Brandon spun around. James, come on, she's just some. Give her the rifle. Something in James's voice killed Brandon's protest before it could form. He'd never heard his manager sound like that. Never seen that look in his eyes. Like he was standing at attention even though he hadn't moved. Brandon's hands shook as he lifted the rifle from its mount. 30 pounds of precision engineering. Fine, whatever. Here's your rifle, Grandma. Try not to. Eleanor took the weapon from his hands. What happened next made no sense. Her hand still trembled. The nerve damage was permanent. But the moment her fingers touched the rifle, something changed. The tremor didn't stop. It integrated, like a vibration finding its frequency, like chaos becoming rhythm. She lifted the 30-pound rifle with one hand, like it weighed nothing. Firing pin tension is off by 0.3 millimeters. Her trembling fingers moved along the mechanism without looking at it. Would cause misfire in cold weather. -15 Celsius approximately. James grabbed an inspection tool from behind the counter. His hands were steadier than his voice. He checked the mechanism. His face went white. "She's right," he said, "down to the exact measurement." The woman in athleisure had completely lowered her phone. Her mouth formed a perfect O of confusion. "What the hell is happening?" one of the tactical vest bros whispered. Brandon grabbed onto his last shred of denial. "Lucky guess, she probably read it online. Wikipedia warrior, YouTube expert." "There is no Wikipedia article about this weapon," James said quietly. "There is no YouTube video. These specifications are classified. The CQ variant doesn't officially exist." "Then how does she—" "Because she's held one before." James turned to Eleanor, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone lean in. "Haven't you, ma'am?" Eleanor set the rifle down gently. Her hands trembled. Her expression remained calm. "Once or twice." Pooh. Brandon laughed, but it came out high and nervous. "This is insane. This is some kind of prank. Where are the cameras? Who put you up to this?" "No prank," James said. "No cameras." He was staring at Eleanor like he'd seen a ghost. "That challenge coin, the insignia, that's Echo 7. The name meant nothing to most people in the room, but one of the tactical vest bros, Tyler, the one with the military haircut, sucked in a sharp breath. "Echo 7, he repeated. "That's not real. That's a legend, a story they tell at Benning to scare recruits." "What's Echo 7, the athleisure woman asked. Tyler's voice dropped low. "Supposedly a unit of instructor-level operatives, the ones who train the trainers, the people who taught the guys who taught Delta Force. But it's not real. It can't be real." "Tell that to her," James said, nodding at Eleanor. Every eye in the room turned to the 67-year-old woman in the faded cardigan. Brandon shook his head violently. No way. This is garbage. She probably bought that coin on eBay. Probably memorized some specs from a military forum." He grabbed his phone. "You know what I'm calling the cops? This is harassment. This is fraud. This old lady comes in here pretending to be some kind of—" "Call them," Eleanor said mildly. "Ask for Captain Morrison at the 14th Precinct. Tell him Eleanor Hayes says hello." Brandon's finger froze over the dial button. "You know what?" He lowered his phone. "I don't need cops. I need you to leave. Now, before I have security throw you out. I'd like to take one shot first." "What?" "One shot, 500 meters. Your challenge target." Eleanor nodded toward the range entrance at the back of the store. "The coin that no one's hit in 5 years. Let me try. Then I'll leave." Brandon's confidence came flooding back. This was his territory, his turf. He'd seen competitive shooters try that shot. He'd seen military veterans try. No one had even come close. A shaky old lady. This would end the charade once and for all. "Fine," he said, smiling again. "You want to embarrass yourself? Be my guest. In fact, let's make it interesting." He turned to the crowd. "Everyone follow me. Free entertainment. Watch Grandma miss the shot of a lifetime." The crowd moved like a tide toward the range entrance. 20 people plus Eleanor, plus James, plus Brandon leading the parade. The woman in athleisure had her phone up again. "Okay, plot twist. Apparently this old lady thinks she's some kind of special forces." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "My money's still on complete humiliation. Stay tuned." The range at Summit Arms was the store's crown jewel. 500 meters of professional-grade shooting lanes, electronic targets, wind simulation, climate control, and at the far end, barely visible to the naked eye, hung the challenge target. A silver dollar, suspended on fishing line, swaying slightly in the artificial breeze. In 5 years, 247 shooters had tried to hit it. Competition champions, military snipers, Instagram influencers with more followers than skill. 247 attempts, 0 successes. Brandon gestured grandly. "There it is, Grandma, 500 meters. A target smaller than your hearing aid. You've got one shot to prove you're not completely full of crap." 3 shots, Eleanor said. "Excuse me?" 3 shots, one to hit it, one to split it, one with my eyes closed. The crowd burst out laughing. Even James raised an eyebrow. With your eyes closed, Brandon was almost crying with laughter. Oh my God, this is even better than I thought. Yes, absolutely yes. 3 shots, eyes closed, whatever you want. This is going to be amazing. Eleanor walked to the firing line. Her gait was steady, her hands were not. She knelt slowly, her knees protesting with age. From her canvas bag, she pulled worn shooting gloves. The leather was cracked, but soft molded to her hands from what looked like decades of use. She's really doing this, someone whispered. $200 says she misses completely. I'll take that bet. She probably can't even see the target. Brandon cupped his hands around his mouth. Don't strain yourself, Grandma. We have a medic on call. More laughter. Eleanor didn't react. She settled into position, adjusted the rifle, pressed her cheek against the stock, and then something happened that nobody expected. Her entire body changed. The trembling didn't stop. It shifted, like static becoming signal, like noise becoming music. Her hands still shook, but the shaking had found a pattern, a rhythm, something that worked with her aim instead of against it. Her breathing slowed, deep and measured, in through the nose, out through the mouth, each exhale lasting exactly 4 seconds. James recognized the technique. He'd seen it at Quantico. He'd seen it in Afghanistan. The breathing pattern of someone who had taken more shots than they could count. The crowd fell quiet. Something in the air had changed. Something that made jokes die in throats and smirks fade from faces. Brandon tried to break the tension. Any day now, Grandma. My Social Security will kick in before you take this shot. Eleanor's trembling finger found the trigger. She fired. The sound was thunder in the enclosed space. The recoil would have knocked a normal person backward. Eleanor didn't move. 500 meters away, the coin rang like a bell, spinning wildly on its fishing line. A perfect hit. Dead center. Silence. Absolute silence. Lucky shot, Brandon said, but his voice had lost its edge. Total fluke. No way she... Eleanor adjusted her aim slightly. Her hands trembled. Her breathing stayed measured. She fired again. The coin split. A piece flew off into the darkness, glinting under the range lights. Someone in the crowd made a choking sound. Third shot, Eleanor announced. Her voice was calm, conversational, like she was ordering coffee. She closed her eyes. No way, Tyler breathed. There's no way. This is impossible, the athleisure woman whispered. This is literally impossible. Brandon's face had gone gray. His phone hung forgotten in his hand. Eleanor's trembling finger found the trigger one more time. She fired. The remaining piece of the coin disintegrated. Nothing left but the fishing line swaying empty in the artificial wind. 3 shots. 1 hit, 1 split, 1 with eyes closed. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10, 15. Then James Harrington spoke and his voice cracked on the words. I've been shooting for 25 years. Competition, military, private security. I have never... He stopped. Swallowed. Tried again. I have never seen anything like that. Not from anyone. Not with perfect hands. Certainly not with combat nerve damage. Brandon's legs gave out. He sat heavily on an equipment case, his face the color of old paper. That's impossible, he whispered. That's physically impossible. Improbable, Eleanor corrected, rising slowly from her position. Her knees popped. Her hands still trembled. Not impossible. I've made harder shots. She began removing her gloves with methodical precision. Who are you? Someone called out. What are you? James answered before Eleanor could. I don't know exactly, but I know that challenge coin. I know what Echo 7 means, and I know... He never finished the sentence, because that's when they all heard it. Heavy footsteps, someone running, not jogging, sprinting, taking stairs 3 at a time from the sound of it. A door burst open somewhere above them. More footsteps. Closer now, faster. Brandon stumbled to his feet. What the hell? The door to the range exploded inward. And Richard Coleman, CEO of Summit Arms, stood in the doorway, 58 years old, 6'3". Silver hair, usually perfect now, wild and disheveled. Custom suit that cost more than most people's cars, now wrinkled and askew. Chest heaving, face flushed. He'd run from his office on the third floor, 72 stairs. He'd taken them all. His eyes swept the room, past Brandon, past James, past the stunned crowd with their phones still raised. They locked onto Eleanor. And Richard Coleman, CEO of a company worth $400 million, a man who had negotiated with senators and dined with generals, a man who had never shown weakness in 40 years of business, dropped to one knee. The sound of his expensive pants hitting the concrete floor echoed in the silent room. "Instructor Hayes," he said. His voice broke on her name. "Ma'am." He looked up at her with tears streaming freely down his face. "Cadet Coleman, class of '92, Fort Benning." He swallowed hard. "You saved my life in Mogadishu. You pulled me out of a burning Humvee with 2 bullets in your shoulder. You held off 17 hostiles for 6 hours until extraction arrived." He bowed his head. "And I never got to thank you." The room had stopped breathing. 20 phones recorded a CEO kneeling before an old woman in a cardigan. Brandon made a sound like a wounded animal. The woman in athleisure had tears running down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Tyler had snapped to attention without realizing it, his body responding to something deeper than conscious thought. Eleanor looked down at Richard Coleman. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her gray-blue eyes softened. "Stand up, Richard," she said gently. "You know I never liked the formality." But Richard didn't stand, not yet. He turned his head to face the crowd, still on one knee, still crying. But his voice grew stronger. "This woman," he said, "is Eleanor Hayes, call sign the Gray Ghost, chief instructor at Fort Benning Advanced Marksmanship School for 30 years. He paused, letting the weight of it land. "She trained me. She trained my instructors. She trained the people who trained Delta Force SEAL Team 6 Marine Force Recon. She wrote the manual. The actual manual. Every military sniper in this country learns from a book that has her name on the cover." Brandon's hand found the wall, steadying himself against collapse. The tremor in her hands, Richard continued, his voice shaking now, is nerve damage. From holding a defensive position at Vauban Lightning in Afghanistan, August 2004. She was 53 years old. He stood now, but his eyes never left Eleanor. She took out 17 enemy combatants with a damaged rifle and a separated shoulder while evacuating 32 wounded soldiers. She held that position for 6 hours. 6 hours with no support, no backup, no hope of rescue. His voice rose. She saved every single one of them. Every wounded man in that compound went home to their families because this woman refused to die. The crowd stood frozen. Some were crying, some were shaking. The tactical vest bros looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. "And you," Richard turned to Brandon and his voice turned to ice. "You called her grandma. You asked if she needed a nurse. You made her a joke. You made her entertainment." Brandon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You're fired," Richard said, effective immediately. "Mr. Coleman, I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem." Richard's eyes could have cut steel. "You didn't know. You didn't care to know. You saw a woman with gray hair and shaking hands, and you decided she was nothing. You decided she was less than you. Less than everyone in this room. Please, security will escort you out. Leave your keys, leave your badge, leave your dignity because you clearly never had any to begin with." Brandon collapsed backward onto the equipment case, his face in his hands. James pulled out his radio. "Security to the range. We have a termination." The crowd began to murmur. Phones were still recording. This video would have 1 million views by morning. But Eleanor raised her trembling hand. "Richard." The CEO turned to face her. "Wait." Richard's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this man made a mistake." Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. "A serious one. But he's young, and young people make mistakes." She looked at Brandon. Really looked at him. Past the slicked hair and the swagger, past the cruelty and the showmanship. She saw a 26-year-old kid who was terrified, who had built his entire identity on being better than others, who didn't know who he was without someone to look down on. She'd seen that fear before, in young recruits who talked too big because they felt too small, in soldiers who mocked others because they were terrified of being mocked themselves. "I was like him once," Eleanor said. "Arrogant, certain I could judge people at a glance. It took someone patient to show me how wrong I was." Richard shook his head. "He doesn't deserve..." Deserve has nothing to do with it. Eleanor's gray-blue eyes met Richard's. You remember what I taught you about the difference between punishment and growth? Richard was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked, his hands clenched and unclenched. Punishment feels good, he finally said, reciting words he'd learned 30 years ago. Growth does good. And which one lasts? Richard closed his eyes. When he opened them, some of the ice had melted. 6 months probation, he said to Brandon. Mandatory training, community service at the VA hospital. He paused. And if I ever hear that you've treated another customer the way you treated her, I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again. Brandon looked up. His face was wet. His hands were shaking worse than Eleanor's. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Don't apologize to me, Eleanor said. I don't need your apology. I know who I am. She stepped closer to him. Apologize to the next person you see who looks like they don't belong, the next old woman, the next person with a disability, the next anyone who seems like an easy target. Her trembling hand lifted his chin, forcing him to meet her eyes. You don't know their story. You don't know what they have survived. You don't know what they can do. And the moment you decide you do, she held his gaze. That's the moment you become dangerous, not to them, to yourself. Brandon nodded frantically. I understand. I'll do better. I swear I'll do better. Don't swear it to me. Swear it to yourself and then spend the rest of your life keeping that promise. She released his chin and turned to face the crowd. 20 people, 20 phones, 20 faces wearing various expressions of shock, shame, and something that might have been transformation. You all laughed, Eleanor said, not accusation, just fact. Every one of you. You saw an old woman and you laughed. No one spoke. I don't blame you, not really. You've been taught to see age as weakness, to see trembling hands as failure, to see cardigans, sweaters, and orthopedic shoes as targets. She held up her trembling hands. But here's the thing about assumptions. They tell you more about yourself than they ever tell you about the person you're judging. She let that land. Most of the people you mock in your lives won't be able to prove you wrong. They won't have impossible shots or secret military histories. They'll just walk away feeling small, feeling worthless, feeling like they don't matter. Her gray-blue gaze swept across every face. Is that who you want to be? People who make others feel worthless. The athleisure woman lowered her phone completely. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry. You didn't think, Eleanor finished. That's the problem. None of you thought, you just reacted. She pointed at the woman's phone. That video you were recording, the one meant to humiliate me, you can delete it now, or you can post it. Your choice, wow. The woman looked at her phone, at the footage, at the old woman who had just destroyed every assumption she'd ever made. I'm keeping it, she said quietly, but not for the reason I started recording. Eleanor nodded. Fair enough. Tyler, the one with the military haircut, stepped forward. His eyes were red. His voice was rough. My grandmother, he said. She was a nurse in Vietnam, combat surgical unit. She had the same tremor you have, from holding wounded soldiers steady during 18-hour surgeries. He swallowed hard. She died last year. And his voice broke. I never told her I was proud of her. I never asked about her service. I just saw an old woman with shaking hands. Eleanor took his hand. Her trembling fingers wrapped around his steady ones. What was her name? Ruth Morrison. Ruth Morrison raised a grandson who still tears up when he talks about her. Eleanor squeezed his hand. That tells me she did something right. And somewhere she knows you're proud. They always know. Tyler's tears fell freely now. He didn't try to hide them. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for showing us. One by one, others stepped forward. The tactical vest bros, shamefaced and quiet. The man in the polo shirt. The customers who had laughed. Each one offering something. An apology. A confession. A story about their own grandmother or grandfather or parent who they'd dismissed without meaning to. Eleanor accepted each one with grace. No gloating, no victory lap. Just acknowledgement. James watched from the side, his military bearing softened by something that looked like reverence. Richard stood nearby, still processing. 30 years ago, this woman had taught him to shoot. Today, she was teaching him something far more valuable. When the last apology had been offered, when the crowd began to disperse, Richard approached Eleanor. "Why didn't you say something right away, when they first started mocking you? Why let it go on so long?" Eleanor's trembling hands straightened her cardigan. The coffee stain was still there. She'd probably never get it out. "Because respect that has to be demanded isn't real respect," she said. "And because those people needed to feel their assumptions before they could question them. You were testing us. I was giving you a chance to do the right thing on your own." Her smile was sad. "Most people don't take it. That's not a reason to stop offering it." Richard shook his head slowly. "You could have humiliated them from the start, shown them the coin, dropped my name, made them feel like dirt. And what would that have taught them? That they should be nice to people, because those people might be dangerous." Eleanor shook her head. "No, they needed to see themselves, needed to feel what they were doing. Only then does the lesson stick." She turned toward the exit, her orthopedic shoes silent on the concrete. "Ma'am," Richard called out. "Instructor Hayes?" She stopped but didn't turn. "Will I see you again?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I came in here for a scope adjustment. Thought it would take 20 minutes. She glanced back over her shoulder. "Didn't expect a reunion." "That doesn't answer my question." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." She started walking again, but Richard's voice stopped her. "We're creating a new training program. Not just marksmanship. Character. Teaching the next generation that the person who looks weakest might be the strongest in the room." Eleanor's trembling hand found the door handle. "I want you to design it," Richard said. "I want you to run it. I want you to do for my employees what you did for me 30 years ago." Eleanor pushed the door open. Warm evening air flooded in. "I retired 5 years ago, Richard. Bad knees. Worse patience." "Funny," Richard said. "Your knees didn't stop you from kneeling for that shot, and your patience lasted through 40 minutes of insults." Eleanor's shoulders shook. It took Richard a moment to realize she was laughing. "You always were too smart for your own good, Cadet Coleman. I had a good teacher." Eleanor stepped through the doorway, then paused. "That scope adjustment I came in for. Is anyone actually going to help me with that?" James stepped forward immediately. "I'll handle it personally, ma'am. On the house. Whatever you need." "Good." Eleanor's gray-blue eyes twinkled. "Because I've got a competition in 3 weeks and my scope is off by 2 clicks. She walked out into the evening. Behind her, the store buzzed with aftermath. Phones uploading videos. Employees whispering. A young man named Brandon sitting on an equipment case staring at nothing, trying to figure out how to rebuild himself from the ground up. The athleisure woman posted her video without a caption. She didn't need one. In 12 hours, it would have 3 million views. In 24, it would be on every news site in the country. Tyler Morrison stayed behind after everyone else had left. He asked James about veteran organizations, about ways to honor the people who had served, about his grandmother. James gave him names, numbers, stories. When Tyler finally left, he was carrying more than just information. He was carrying purpose. Richard Coleman returned to his third-floor office. He didn't sit at his desk. He stood at the window looking down at the parking lot where Eleanor Hayes was climbing into a sensible Honda with a faded NRA instructor sticker on the bumper. His phone buzzed. Board members wanting to know about the viral video, marketing people wanting to capitalize on the publicity, legal people wanting to assess liability. He ignored them all. On his desk sat a framed photograph he usually kept in a drawer. A young man in military fatigues standing next to a woman with dark hair and steady hands. Fort Benning, 1992. The day she told him he might actually be worth something someday if he worked hard enough. He'd spent 30 years trying to prove her right. Tonight he wasn't sure if he had. Eleanor Hayes drove home through streets that didn't know or care about what had just happened. Traffic lights, crosswalks, people walking dogs and pushing strollers. Normal life, the kind she'd spent 40 years protecting. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. They always did, probably always would. At her apartment, she hung up her cardigan, made herself tea, sat by the window as the sun set. On her wall hung no medals, no commendations, no photographs except one, a faded picture from 1985. A training class full of young faces. Most of them were gone now. Wars, accidents, time. But their students survived, and their students. 3,000 snipers, give or take. 30 years of teaching, a legacy measured in lives saved, not trophies earned. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The gray ghost walks among us. Thank you for reminding us that strength doesn't always look strong. Eleanor smiled, one of her students probably. Or one of their students. The ripples spread further than anyone could track. She set down the phone and picked up her tea. Her hands trembled. They always would, but her aim remained true, in more ways than one. The video hit 1 million views before Eleanor Hayes finished her first cup of tea. She didn't know this. She was sitting by her window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, her trembling hands wrapped around warm ceramic. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones after 40 years of gunfire and shouting and helicopters. Her phone buzzed again, and again, and again. She ignored it, but 3 miles away in the parking lot of Summit Arms, Brandon Cole couldn't ignore anything. He sat in his car with the engine off. The dashboard clock read 8:47 p.m. He'd been sitting there for over 2 hours staring at his phone, watching his life implode in real time. The video was everywhere. Someone had edited it with captions. Arrogant employee mocks elderly woman. CEO drops to his knees. The gray ghost reveals herself. The comments were brutal. Fire this piece of garbage. Brandon Cole is everything wrong with young people today. Hope he never works again. Find his address. He needs to learn a lesson. That last one made Brandon's stomach turn. He'd seen what internet mobs could do. He'd laughed at their victims before never thinking he'd become one. His phone rang. Mom. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Dad. Voicemail. A text from his brother. Dude, what the hell did you do? Mom is crying. Brandon's hands were shaking now. Worse than Eleanor's. At least hers had a noble cause. He pulled up the video again. Watched himself mock a woman old enough to be his grandmother. Watched himself preen and strut and play to the crowd. Watched the exact moment his face changed when she started reciting classified specifications. He looked like a fool. He looked like a monster. He looked like exactly what he was. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Brandon Cole. A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. Yeah, this is Megan Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're running a story about the incident at Summit Arms today. Would you like to comment? Brandon hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. Mr. Cole, this is... He hung up again. 3 more calls. 4, 5. News stations podcasts, some guy claiming to be from a digital justice website who wanted to hear his side. Brandon turned off his phone and sat in the darkness listening to his own breathing. 6 months probation, Richard Coleman had said. Community service at the VA hospital, a chance to change. But how do you change when the whole world has already decided who you are? He thought about Eleanor Hayes, the way she'd looked at him. Not with hatred, not with triumph, with something worse, understanding. She'd seen through him, seen the scared kid underneath the swagger, seen the desperate need to feel superior because he'd never learned to feel enough. And instead of destroying him, which she could have done, which everyone would have applauded, she'd asked for mercy. Why Brandon didn't understand mercy? He'd never given it, never expected to receive it. He turned his phone back on, scrolled past the notifications. Found the address for the VA hospital. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he'd start. But tonight he sat in the dark and let himself feel the weight of what he'd done. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler Morrison was having a very different evening. He'd driven straight from Summit Arms to his mother's house. She lived in a small ranch home on the east side, the same house where Tyler had grown up, the same house where his grandmother Ruth had spent her final years. His mother answered the door with surprise on her face. Tyler, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I did, Mom. He pushed past her into the living room. I need to talk to you about Grandma. Margaret Morrison's expression shifted, guarded now, careful. What about her service, Vietnam, what she did over there? Margaret sat down slowly on the faded floral couch. Tyler noticed for the first time how much she looked like Ruth. Same tired eyes, same hands that never quite stopped moving. Your grandmother didn't like to talk about that. I know, but I need to know. Today I met someone. He stopped, started again. I met a woman at the gun store, older, hands that shook like grandma's did. Everyone was laughing at her, making fun of her. I laughed too. Margaret's face hardened. Tyler James Morrison. I know, Mom, I know, but then he shook his head, still not quite believing it. She made 3 impossible shots. The CEO of the company dropped to his knees. Turns out she trained Delta Force, trained SEAL Team 6. She's some kind of legend. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. And this made you think of Ruth? The woman said something about how people with that combat tremor, are the most dangerous shooters you'll ever meet because they've taken so many shots their nerves are damaged, because they've seen things nobody should see. Tyler sat down across from his mother. Grandma had that tremor. Her hands shook every day for as long as I can remember. And I never once asked her why. Margaret's eyes had gone wet. She stood abruptly and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down an old photo album Tyler hadn't seen in years. Your grandmother, she said, opening it to a yellowed photograph, was assigned to the 71st Evacuation Hospital in Pleiku. She was 23 years old, younger than you are now. Tyler looked at the photo, a young woman in army fatigues, dark hair pulled back, standing in front of a building with sandbags piled around it. She was smiling, but there was something in her eyes, something old. She never told me this. She never told anyone, not even your grandfather, really. Bits and pieces, fragments, the smell of antiseptic and blood, the sound of helicopters that meant more wounded incoming, the faces of boys, and they were boys, Tyler, 18 and 19 years old, the faces of boys she couldn't save. Margaret turned the page, another photo. Ruth in surgical scrubs, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She worked 18-hour shifts, sometimes 24 hours straight. They'd run out of anesthesia and she'd hold soldiers down while the surgeons operated. That's where the tremor came from. Not from age, from holding men steady while they screamed. Tyler's throat had closed up. He couldn't speak. She saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. There's no way to know for sure. Margaret closed the album. And when she came home, nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to know, so she stopped talking, kept it all inside, raised a family, lived a quiet life. Why didn't you tell me? Because she asked me not to. Margaret's voice was fierce now. She said the war took enough from her. She wasn't going to let it define her for the rest of her life. She wanted to be Grandma Ruth, not Nurse Morrison from the 71st Evac. Tyler took the album from his mother's hands, held it like it was made of glass. I wish I'd asked her. Before she died, I wish I'd told her I was proud. She knew, baby. Margaret's hand found his shoulder. She always knew. Tyler stayed at his mother's house until midnight, going through photo albums, reading old letters, learning about a woman he'd known his whole life, but never really seen. When he finally left, he took the album with him, and he made himself a promise he would never again look at an older person without wondering what battles they'd fought, what sacrifices they'd made, what stories they carried in their trembling hands. Back at Eleanor's apartment, the phone had finally stopped buzzing. She'd turned it off after the 50th notification. Whatever was happening out there in the digital world, it could wait until morning. She was too old and too tired to care about viral videos, but she couldn't sleep. The memories were too close tonight. They'd been stirred up by the events at Summit Arms, by Richard Coleman's tears, by the weight of a rifle in her hands after so many years. She sat in her worn armchair and let herself remember. Fort Benning, 1985. Her first day as an instructor. A room full of young soldiers who looked at her like she was a joke. A woman teaching them to shoot. They'd laughed, some of them openly. She'd made them run until they vomited. Then she'd outshot every single one of them. Then she'd made them run again. By the end of the first week, they'd stopped laughing. By the end of the first month, they'd started listening. By the end of the course, 3 of them had become the top snipers in their battalions. 2 had gone on to special forces. 1 had died in Panama, taking out a machine gun nest that would have killed his entire squad. She still remembered his name. David Chen, 22 years old, a kid from San Francisco who'd never held a rifle before basic training. He'd sent her a letter before his final deployment. She still had it folded in a drawer with all the others. Instructor Hayes, it read, I don't know if I'll make it home, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm ready. You made me ready. Not just to shoot, but to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Thank you for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself. David Chen had died 3 weeks later. The letter had arrived the same day as the notification. Eleanor had added his name to the list she kept in her head. The students she'd trained who hadn't come home. It was a long list, too long, but she remembered every name. That was the weight you carried when you taught people to kill, when you made them good at it. When you sent them into places where that skill meant survival, some people thought she must feel guilty, must regret her choices, must wake up at night wondering if she'd done the right thing. She didn't. She'd given her students the best chance she could, armed them with skills, with confidence, with the knowledge that someone believed in them. What they did with those gifts was their choice. What happened to them was fate, but she remembered. That was her burden. To remember every face, every name, every letter that arrived with news no one wanted to read. Her trembling hands found the photograph on her wall. The training class from 1985. 32 faces, 16 had died in service, 8 had been wounded badly enough to end their careers. 6 had gone on to become instructors themselves, continuing the chain. And 2 had disappeared into the shadow world of operations that never officially happened. She didn't know if they were alive or dead. Probably never would. 30 years, 3,000 students, a legacy written in blood and silence. Was it worth it? Eleanor looked at her shaking hands, at the scars she could trace in the darkness, at the face in the mirror that had grown old while she wasn't paying attention. Yes, she decided, it was worth it. Every life saved, every mission completed. Every soldier who'd come home to their family because she'd taught them to shoot straight and think clear. That was worth any price. Her phone sat silent on the table. Tomorrow it would explode again with notifications and requests and people wanting pieces of her story. Tomorrow she'd have to decide what to do about Richard's offer. Tomorrow the world would keep spinning and demanding and expecting. But tonight she sat with her memories and her tea in her trembling hands, and she let herself be proud of the life she'd lived. The morning came too early. Eleanor woke to pounding on her door. Insistent, urgent. The kind of knocking that didn't take no for an answer. She pulled on her robe, grabbed the small pistol she kept in her nightstand drawer. Old habits, and made her way to the door. Who is it? Mrs. Hayes, Eleanor Hayes, a woman's voice, professional but strained. My name is Patricia Okonkwo. I'm with the Department of Defense. I need to speak with you immediately. Eleanor's hand tightened on the pistol. Show me identification. A card slid under the door. Eleanor picked it up, examined it carefully. Department of Defense, Special Operations Liaison. The photo matched the voice, a black woman in her early 50s with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Eleanor opened the door, but didn't lower the pistol. Patricia Okonkwo didn't flinch. May I come in? That depends on what you want. It's about Richard Coleman. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. What about him? He submitted a request last night, wants to reinstate you as a consultant, wants you to develop a new training program for his company. Patricia paused. The request was flagged by our monitoring systems. Your file came up. I've been retired for 5 years. My file should be inactive. Your file will never be inactive, Mrs. Hayes. You know that. Eleanor studied this woman for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in, but make it quick. I haven't had my coffee yet. Patricia entered the apartment, her trained eyes cataloging everything, the sparse furniture, the single photograph on the wall, the pistol still in Eleanor's hand. You can put that away. I'm not here to threaten you. Then why are you here? Patricia sat on the edge of the worn armchair without being invited. Because your little demonstration yesterday has created a problem. That video has been viewed over 5 million times. Your face is everywhere. Your name is trending. People are calling you a national hero. I'm not a hero. I'm a retired instructor who wanted her scope adjusted. Nevertheless, you've become visible, and visibility creates vulnerabilities. Patricia leaned forward. There are people who would very much like to know where Eleanor Hayes lives, what she does, who she talks to. Eleanor finally lowered the pistol. You're talking about the Volkov network. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. You've been keeping up. I read, I listen, I pay attention. Eleanor sat down across from Patricia. The Volkov network has been hunting former operatives for 3 years. 12 confirmed deaths, 6 disappearances, all people who were involved in Eastern European operations during the 90s. 14 deaths now, Patricia corrected quietly. 2 more last month. And yes, you're on their list. Eleanor's trembling hands were steady now. The adrenaline did that sometimes. I've been on kill lists before. Not like this one. The Volkovs are patient, methodical. They've been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. A former operative becoming publicly visible. An address that can be traced. A routine that can be mapped. So what are you suggesting that I disappear? Go into hiding? I'm suggesting that you let us help you. Patricia pulled out a folder. Richard Coleman's offer is legitimate, a training program for his employees, character development, respect protocols, the whole package. But we'd like to add a layer to it. A cover, a relocation, new apartment, better security, legitimate employment that keeps you in one place where we can monitor threats. Patricia opened the folder. We've already identified a suitable location. Same city, different neighborhood. Close to Summit Arms for the work, but with secure access and a response team within 3 minutes. Eleanor looked at the folder. Floor plans, security assessments, threat analyses. You prepared all this overnight. We've had a contingency file on you for 5 years, Mrs. Hayes, ever since you retired, just in case. In case of what? In case you became a target again. Patricia closed the folder. The Volkovs have a long memory, and you were directly responsible for the failure of their Prague operation in 1999. Eleanor went very still. Prague, she repeated. You didn't know they'd connected it to you. I knew there were rumors. I didn't know they'd confirmed anything. They haven't, not publicly, but our intelligence suggests they've narrowed the list of possible operatives to 3 people. You're one of them. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. The morning sun was just cresting the buildings across the street. Normal people were waking up, making coffee, heading to normal jobs, living normal lives. She hadn't had a normal life since she was 23 years old. Prague was supposed to be buried, she said quietly. Sealed files, destroyed records, everyone involved either dead or disappeared. Someone talked. Patricia's voice was gentle now. We don't know who. We don't know when. But the Volkovs have been piecing it together for years. And now that you've gone public, they'll accelerate their timeline. Yes. Eleanor watched a mother push a stroller down the sidewalk below. A businessman hurried past with a coffee in one hand and a phone in the other. A delivery truck double-parked while its driver ran into a bakery. Ordinary life. The thing she'd spent 40 years protecting. The thing she'd never been able to have for herself. What happened in Prague, she asked, though she knew Patricia wouldn't answer. You know I can't discuss that. Then why bring it up? Because you need to understand the stakes. Patricia stood and joined her at the window. This isn't just about your safety, Eleanor. It's about everyone you trained, everyone connected to you. If the Volkovs get to you, they get access to information that could compromise hundreds of operations and thousands of lives. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I would never talk. I know that, you know that, but they don't care about making you talk. They care about making an example, about showing the world that no one who crossed them is ever safe, no matter how long ago, no matter how well hidden. The 2 women stood in silence for a long moment. Richard's offer, Eleanor finally said, hey, it's real, not just a cover. It's real, yeah, me real. He submitted the paperwork before we even knew about it. The man genuinely wants you to help transform his company. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Apparently you made quite an impression yesterday. I made 3 shots and gave a speech about respect. Sometimes that's enough to change the world. Eleanor turned from the window. Her hands had started trembling again, the adrenaline wearing off. I'll consider your offer, the relocation, the security, but I have conditions. Name them. First, I want full transparency. Everything your people know about the Volkov network, I know. No compartmentalization, no need-to-know nonsense. Patricia nodded slowly. Agreed. Second, I want access to my old files, all of them. including Prague. A pause. That's more complicated. I'm sure it is. But if I'm going to be a target, I want to know exactly why. I want to know what they think I did and whether they're right. Patricia's expression was unreadable. I'll see what I can do. Third, Eleanor's voice hardened. If they come for me, I handle it my way. No extraction teams, no safe houses, no running. Eleanor, I've spent 40 years teaching people to stand their ground. I'm not going to run when it's my turn to practice what I preached. Patricia studied her for a long moment. You know that's not tactically sound. I know it's who I am. Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. Take it or leave it. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Patricia nodded. I'll make the arrangements. You'll have the new apartment by end of week. Security protocols in place within 48 hours. She moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Yes. That young man from yesterday, Brandon Cole, he showed up at the VA hospital this morning, 7 a.m., before it even opened. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Did he? The staff didn't know what to make of him. He just sat in the waiting room until someone came to talk to him, said he wanted to volunteer, said he wanted to understand. And they're putting him to work, starting today, filing paperwork, delivering meals, whatever they need. Patricia's hand found the doorknob. I thought you'd want to know. She left without waiting for a response. Eleanor stood alone in her apartment, the morning sun warming her face, her trembling hands clasped in front of her. Brandon Cole at the VA hospital. Tyler Morrison learning about his grandmother. Richard Coleman planning transformation programs. The ripples spreading outward from one afternoon at a gun store. She'd spent 30 years teaching people to shoot, but yesterday she'd taught them something different, something that might matter more in the end. Her phone sat on the table where she'd left it. She picked it up, turned it on, watched the notifications flood in, 12,000 messages. She scrolled past most of them looking for one name. There, a text from Richard Coleman sent at 6 a.m. The offer stands. Take all the time you need, but I hope you'll say yes. The world needs more teachers like you. Eleanor's trembling fingers typed a reply. I'll do it. One condition, we start with your own employees, every single one, no exceptions. The response came within seconds. Done. When can you start? Eleanor looked around her apartment. At the sparse furniture she'd never bothered to personalize. At the single photograph that held all her memories. At the life she'd built around absence and secrets and silence. Time for something new. Monday, she typed. I'll start Monday. She set down the phone and went to make coffee. The tremor in her hands made the cup rattle against the saucer, but she didn't spill a drop. 40 years of practice. Some skills you never lose. Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold rain that seeped into your bones. Eleanor Hayes stood outside Summit Arms at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before anyone else was scheduled to arrive. Her trembling hands held a cup of coffee from the gas station down the street. Her orthopedic shoes were already wet from the walk across the parking lot. She could have waited in her car, could have stayed dry, but 40 years of military discipline had taught her that leaders arrive first and leave last. The new apartment Patricia had arranged was closer to the store, better security, cameras she could monitor from her phone, panic buttons in every room, the kind of precautions that reminded her every day that somewhere out there people wanted her dead. She pushed that thought aside. Today wasn't about the Volkov network. Today was about something more important. Today was about change. A car pulled into the parking lot, then another, then three more in quick succession. By 6:55, a small crowd had gathered near the entrance, huddled under umbrellas and hoodies watching Eleanor with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. She recognized James Harrington immediately. The store manager had traded his usual polo shirt for a button-down, like he was meeting someone important, which Eleanor supposed he was. Richard Coleman's Mercedes pulled in at exactly 6:59. He stepped out in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but he'd forgone the umbrella. By the time he reached Eleanor, his silver hair was plastered to his forehead. You're early, he said. I'm always early. I remember. He smiled, and for a moment he wasn't a CEO anymore. He was a scared 22-year-old cadet standing at attention while a woman half his size told him everything he was doing wrong. Should we go inside? Not yet. Eleanor turned to face the gathered employees, 15 of them. Some she recognized from the incident last week. Others were new faces probably called in from other locations. And there at the back of the group, trying to make himself invisible, Brandon Cole. He looked different. The slicked back hair was gone, replaced by something simpler, more humble. The confident smirk had disappeared entirely. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept well in days. Good, Eleanor thought. Growth starts with discomfort. Everyone inside, she said, her voice cutting through the rain. Training room, 5 minutes. She didn't wait to see if they followed. She knew they would. The training room at Summit Arms had been hastily converted from a storage space. Folding chairs arranged in rows. A whiteboard at the front. Fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly, the kind of sound that crawled under your skin after an hour. Eleanor stood at the front of the room, her trembling hands clasped behind her back, and watched the employees file in. They sat in clusters. The veterans near the front, James and 2 others who moved with military bearing. The younger staff scattered through the middle, phones already in hand out of habit. Brandon took a seat in the very back corner, as far from Eleanor as physically possible. Richard stood to the side, the arms crossed, watching everything. "Put your phones away," Eleanor said. Nobody moved. That wasn't a request. The phones disappeared. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. Some of you know who I am. Some of you watched me make 3 impossible shots last week. Some of you laughed at me before that." She let the silence stretch. "I'm not here to punish you for laughing. I'm not here to make you feel guilty. Guilt is useless. It makes you feel bad without making you better." Her gray-blue eyes swept across the room. "I'm here to teach you something, not how to shoot. You already know that, or you wouldn't be working here. I'm here to teach you how to see." A young woman in the second row raised her hand hesitantly. "See what? People." Eleanor walked slowly down the center aisle, her orthopedic shoes silent on the thin carpet. When someone walks through that door, you see their clothes, their age, their walk, their hands. And in about 3 seconds, you've decided who they are, what they want, whether they matter. She stopped next to Brandon's chair. He wouldn't look at her. 3 seconds, that's all it takes to judge a human being, to decide if they're worth your time, your respect, or your attention. She moved on, continuing down the aisle. "I've spent 40 years training soldiers, teaching them to assess threats, to read body language, to identify targets." She turned to face the room. "And the first thing I always taught them was this: your assumptions will kill you faster than any enemy." James nodded slowly. He knew exactly what she meant. The enemy who looks dangerous is rarely the one who kills you. It's the one who looks harmless. The old farmer with the bomb under his coat. The child with the grenade in her school bag. The woman in the cardigan with trembling hands. That got a few nervous laughs. "You think I'm joking?" Eleanor's voice hardened. "I'm not." In 2003, a Taliban operative walked into a forward operating base wearing the uniform of an Afghan National Army officer. He passed 3 checkpoints, shook hands with the base commander, sat down for a meeting with 6 American soldiers. She paused. He detonated his vest at 14:32, killed everyone in the room. The nervous laughter died. The soldiers who died that day were good men, experienced, alert. They did everything right by the book. But they saw a uniform and they made an assumption. They saw what they expected to see instead of what was actually there. Eleanor returned to the front of the room. In a gun store, the stakes are lower. Nobody's going to blow themselves up because you misjudged them. But the principle is the same. When you see an old woman with shaking hands and decide she's confused, you're not just being rude, you're being dangerous. You're letting your assumptions override your observations. Richard spoke up from the side. What should we observe instead? Everything. Eleanor picked up a marker and turned to the whiteboard. When I walked into this store last week, what did you see? An old woman, someone said. Gray hair, another added. Shaking hands. Cardigan. Bad shoes. Eleanor wrote each observation on the board. What else? Silence. What about my posture, my gait, the way I moved through the room? James leaned forward. You were cataloging. Your eyes swept every corner. Counted the exits. Identified the people. What else? Your feet. James was standing now, caught up in the analysis. When you stopped, you shifted into a combat stance. Subtle, but it was there. Weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. Eleanor nodded. What else? The challenge coin. James's voice was quiet now. You had it in your pocket. You knew exactly when to reveal it, which means you weren't surprised by any of this. You were testing us. Testing you, Eleanor set down the marker. And you failed, every single one of you. Not because you didn't notice these things, but because you didn't bother to look. Brandon's voice came from the back of the room, rough and strained. How were we supposed to know you looked like... Like what? Eleanor turned to face him. Say it. Brandon's jaw tightened. Like a harmless old woman. Exactly. Eleanor walked toward him again. And that's the most dangerous assumption you can make. Not because every old woman is secretly a sniper, but because the moment you decide someone is harmless, you stop paying attention. You stop seeing them as a person. You start seeing them as a category. She stopped directly in front of his chair. Old, weak, irrelevant. That's what you saw. That's what you decided I was before I took a single step. Brandon's eyes were wet. I know, I'm sorry. I've said I'm sorry 100 times. I don't want your apology. Eleanor's voice was surprisingly gentle. I want you to understand why you did it. Because until you understand, you'll keep doing it to someone else. Someone who doesn't have 3 impossible shots to prove you wrong. She crouched down, bringing herself to his eye level. Her knees protested, but she ignored them. Why did you mock me, Brandon? Not the surface reason, the real reason. Brandon's face crumpled. Because I was scared. The room went still. Scared of what? Scared that. He stopped, swallowed, tried again. Scared that I'm nothing, that without this job, with it being the guy who knows everything about guns, I'm just nobody. And when you walked in looking like you didn't belong, I needed you to be less than me. I needed someone to look down on. Eleanor stayed crouched, her trembling hand finding his shoulder. That's the most honest thing you've said since I met you. Brandon's tears fell freely now. I went to the VA hospital, like you said. I thought it would be, I don't know, easy, like community service, check a box. And there was this guy, Walter, Vietnam vet, lost both legs to a landmine in 1969. Brandon's voice broke. He was in a wheelchair, and his hands shook just like yours, and I started to help him with his breakfast, and he couldn't continue. What happened? He told me about his wife, how she waited for him, how she learned to love him even when he hated himself, how she pushed his wheelchair to their son's graduation and their granddaughter's wedding. Brandon wiped his face with his sleeve, and I realized I've never done anything. I've never sacrificed anything. I've never loved anyone enough to push their wheelchair. Eleanor stood slowly. Her knees screamed, but she didn't let it show. That's where growth starts, Brandon. Not with apologies, with understanding, with seeing someone else clearly and realizing how blind you've been. She turned to face the room. That's your homework. Before next session, I want each of you to spend 4 hours at the VA hospital. Not volunteering, just listening. Find a veteran, ask them about their life. And then ask yourself, what assumptions would I have made about this person if I'd seen them walk into my store? Hands shot up, protests, objections. I didn't ask for questions, Eleanor said. I gave you an assignment, 4 hours, a conversation, a challenge to your assumptions. She walked back to the front of the room. Now, let's talk about what you should have observed when I walked in. The training session lasted 4 hours. Eleanor covered body language, movement patterns, the subtle signs that distinguish a confused customer from a purposeful one. The way experience changes how people carry themselves even when that experience is hidden. She used examples from her own life. Stories that made some people laugh and others go pale. The time she'd identified an assassin by the way he held his coffee cup. The moment she'd recognized a fellow operative in a crowd of thousands because of how he tied his shoes. The details matter, she said again and again. Not the obvious ones, the ones you have to work to see. By the end, even Brandon was taking notes. When Eleanor dismissed them for lunch, Richard pulled her aside. That was remarkable, he said quietly. I've never seen anything like it. It's just the beginning. Eleanor's trembling hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee. One session doesn't change 40 years of habits. They'll need reinforcement. Practice. Failure. How long do you think? 6 months minimum. Probably a year before it becomes instinct. Richard nodded slowly. Whatever you need. Budget, time, resources, it's yours. I need one more thing. Name it. Brandon. Eleanor watched the young man through the window. He was sitting alone on a bench outside staring at nothing. I want him as my assistant. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Brandon? After what he did. Because of what he did. Eleanor set down her coffee. He's broken right now, completely shattered. And broken is where change happens. He either becomes something better or he stays destroyed. I want to make sure it's the first one. That's a risk. Everything worth doing is a risk. Eleanor met his eyes. You took a risk on a woman instructor 40 years ago when everyone said women couldn't shoot. I'm taking a risk on a cruel young man who might learn to be kind. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Do you really think he can change? I think everyone can change. Whether they will is a different question. Eleanor turned toward the door. But he deserves the chance to try. Everyone does. She walked outside, her orthopedic shoes squelching on the wet pavement, and sat down next to Brandon on the bench. He didn't look at her. I talked to Richard, she said. Am I fired for real this time? No, you're promoted. Brandon's head snapped around. What? You're going to be my assistant for the next 6 months minimum. You'll help me set up training sessions. Take notes, observe the other employees, and most importantly, you'll learn. Why? Brandon's voice cracked. Why would you do this for me? I was horrible to you. Yes, you were. Eleanor's trembling hand found his shoulder again. But horrible isn't permanent. It's a choice, and you can make a different choice. I don't deserve this. Probably not, but grace isn't about deserving. It's about becoming. Brandon broke down completely, sobbing on a bench in the rain outside a gun store, his whole body shaking with something that might have been grief or relief or both. Eleanor sat with him, didn't try to stop him, didn't offer platitudes, just waited. When he finally pulled himself together, his eyes were red, but something in them had shifted. What do I do first? He asked. Go home, get some sleep, come back tomorrow, ready to work. That's it. That's everything. Eleanor stood her knees, protesting again. Change doesn't happen in big dramatic moments, Brandon. It happens in small daily choices. Go home, rest, and tomorrow choose to be a little better than you were today. She walked back inside, leaving him on the bench. Through the window, she watched him sit there for another 10 minutes. Watched him wipe his face. Watched him stand up straight for the first time since she'd met him. Watched him walk to his car with something that almost looked like hope. You're good at this, Richard said from behind her. I've had 40 years of practice. Not the training, the mercy, the seeing good in people who haven't shown any. Eleanor's trembling hands found her coffee cup again. You learn that from watching people die. You realize that every single person, no matter how broken, had a moment when they could have gone either way. Became good or bad, kind or cruel. She took a sip. Brandon's at his moment right now. I just gave him a little push in the right direction. And if it doesn't work, if he goes back to being cruel, then I'll know I tried. Eleanor set down the cup. That's all any of us can do, Richard. Try and hope the trying matters. Her phone buzzed, a text from Patricia Okonkwo. We need to talk, tonight. Your apartment, 8 p.m. Eleanor stared at the message for a long moment. Problem? Richard asked. Maybe. She pocketed the phone. Or maybe just the past catching up. Anything I can help with? Not yet. Eleanor gathered her things. But if that changes, I'll let you know. She walked out of Summit Arms into the cold rain, her mind already shifting from training programs to threat assessments, from Brandon Cole's redemption to the shadows gathering at the edges of her careful life. Patricia Okonkwo wanted to meet. That meant news. And news about the Volkov network was never good. Eleanor's apartment was dark when she arrived home. She didn't turn on the lights. Old habits. Dark rooms were harder to surveil, harder to target through windows. She made tea instead of coffee. Her hands needed something warm to steady them. At exactly 8 p.m., a knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps. Pause. 2 more, the signal they'd agreed on. Eleanor opened the door. Patricia stood in the hallway and she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man Eleanor didn't recognize. Late 60s, military bearing so rigid it practically screamed a career officer. Eyes that had seen things they'd never forget. "Eleanor," Patricia said, "this is General Marcus Webb, retired. He has something you need to hear." Eleanor stepped aside to let them in. The 3 of them sat in her small living room. No lights except what came through the window from the street below. 3 people with too many secrets sharing a space meant for one. "Mrs. Hayes," General Webb's voice was gravel and smoke, the product of too many years and too many cigarettes. "I'm going to tell you something that's been classified for 25 years. What I say doesn't leave this room." "Understood." "Understood." Prague, December 1999, Operation Nightfall. Eleanor's blood went cold. "You were part of a 6-person team sent to eliminate a Volkov network cell operating out of the Czech Republic. The mission was compromised. 5 of your team members were killed. You were the sole survivor. I know what happened. I was there. You know what you saw." Webb leaned forward. "You don't know what actually happened." Eleanor's trembling hands tightened on her teacup. "What are you talking about?" "The intelligence that sent your team into that building, the coordinates, the timing, the assurance that there would be minimal resistance." Webb paused. "It was all provided by a source inside the Volkov network, a double agent we'd been running for 3 years. I know. Codename Shepard. His intel was supposed to be solid. His intel was perfect." Webb's eyes met hers. "Too perfect. We didn't realize it at the time, but Shepard wasn't working for us. He was working for them. The whole operation was a setup from the beginning." Eleanor set down her teacup. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold it. "You're telling me my team was betrayed." "I'm telling you your team was sacrificed." Webb's voice was heavy with something that might have been guilt. "The Volkovs knew we had a mole. They fed us Shepard, let us think we'd turned him, and then used him to eliminate our best operatives. Your team. 3 other teams in Europe over the next 18 months. 23 dead. All because we trusted the wrong source." The room was silent except for Eleanor's ragged breathing. "Why are you telling me this now?" Patricia spoke. "Because Shepard is still alive, and last week he surfaced in Colorado, 70 miles from here." Eleanor's world tilted. "We don't know why he's here," Patricia continued. "Could be coincidence, could be the viral video drew attention to your location. Could be something else entirely. But you think he's coming for me?" "We think it's possible." Webb stood, moving to the window, looking out at the street below. "Mrs. Hayes, you're the only survivor of Operation Nightfall, the only person who can identify Shepard by sight, the only loose end they never managed to tie off." Eleanor rose from her chair. Her legs felt weak, but she forced them to hold. "I saw his face in Prague, right before the explosion. I saw him running away while my team died." "We know." Patricia's voice was gentle. "That's why we're here. If Shepard is making a move, you're the primary target. And this time we want to be ready." Eleanor walked to the wall where her single photograph hung. 32 faces from 1985. Students she'd trained, lives she'd shaped. Some of them had died in Prague. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Nothing yet." Webb turned from the window. "Stay visible. Keep your routine. If Shepard is watching, we want him to think you don't know he's here. You want to use me as bait. We want to end this." Webb's voice hardened. 25 years of running, 25 years of watching good people die because one traitor sold them out. If we can draw Shepard into the open, we can finally get justice for everyone he killed. Eleanor thought about her team, about the faces she saw every night when she closed her eyes, about 5 people who had trusted her, followed her die sheet while she survived. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. I'll do it. I'll be your bait." She turned to face them, and there was steel in her gray-blue eyes. "But when the time comes, I want to be the one who pulls the trigger." Webb and Patricia exchanged a look. "That's not standard protocol," Patricia said carefully. "I don't care about protocol. Those were my people, my team, my responsibility." Eleanor's trembling hands clenched into fists. "I've spent 25 years living with their ghosts. I deserve to be the one who avenges them." The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, Webb nodded. "Agreed. When we find Shepard, You will be part of the team. You'll have your shot. Eleanor unclenched her fists, let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then we have a deal. After they left, Eleanor sat alone in the darkness of her apartment. The tea had gone cold. The street lights cast long shadows across the floor. Somewhere outside, a car alarm started and then stopped. 25 years. She'd spent 25 years wondering why she'd survived when everyone else had died. Why she'd been the one to walk out of that building. Why the universe had spared her and taken 5 better people. Now she knew. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was betrayal. Someone had chosen to let her live, had decided she wasn't worth the risk of killing, had made a calculation that a traumatized survivor would be less dangerous than a martyr. They'd been wrong. Eleanor Hayes had spent 25 years training the most dangerous people in the world. She'd turned broken recruits into lethal operatives. She'd written the book on precision shooting. She'd built a legacy that would outlast her by generations. And now, finally, she knew who to blame. Shepard was out there somewhere, 70 miles away, close enough to touch, close enough to kill. Eleanor's trembling hands found the pistol she kept in her nightstand drawer. She ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, ran her fingers along the familiar weight of deadly metal. For the first time in 25 years, she let herself imagine it. The moment when she would look into Shepard's eyes and pull the trigger. The moment when the ghosts of Prague would finally rest. Her hands shook, but her resolve was steady. Some debts could only be paid in blood. 3 weeks passed like water through a cracked cup. Eleanor taught. Brandon learned. The employees of Summit Arms slowly began to see the world differently. And somewhere out there, Shepard watched. Eleanor could feel his eyes on her even when she couldn't prove it. A sensation at the back of her neck. A shadow that moved wrong. A car parked too long in the same spot across from her apartment. She didn't tell anyone, not Patricia, not Richard, not even Brandon, who had become something close to a protege in the weeks since his breakdown. She simply waited, and while she waited, she trained the next generation. "Tell me what you see," Eleanor said, standing at the back of Summit Arms with her arms crossed. Brandon stood next to her, clipboard in hand, watching a young couple browse the handgun display. 3 weeks ago, he would have been at the counter making jokes about the woman's designer purse or the man's nervous posture. Now he observed. "He's ex-military," Brandon said quietly. "The way he stands, feet apart, weight balanced, but he's been out for a while. Lost some of the edge." "What else?" "She's scared, not of him, of the guns. She keeps her hands in her pockets, won't touch anything, but she's here anyway, which means she's doing this for him." Eleanor nodded slightly. "Good. What would you do?" "Approach her first, not him. She's the one who needs reassurance. If I can make her comfortable, he'll trust me more." "Why?" "Because he loves her. Anyone can see that. The way he keeps checking to make sure she's okay. If I treat her well, I'm treating what he values well." Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. 3 weeks ago, you would have deterred her completely." 3 weeks ago, I was an idiot." Brandon's voice carried no self-pity, just acknowledgement. "James would have made the sale eventually, but it would have been about the product. This way, it's about them. Go. Show me what you've learned." Brandon walked toward the couple, his posture open, his smile genuine, in a way it never had been before. Eleanor watched him greet the woman, first ask about her concerns, listen without interrupting. The transformation was remarkable. Not complete, not permanent maybe, but real. Richard appeared at Eleanor's elbow. "He's different." "He's trying to be." "Is that enough?" "Ask me in 6 months." Eleanor turned to face him. "Any news?" Richard's expression shifted. He knew what she was really asking. "Patricia called this morning. They've narrowed Shepard's location. He's using a safe house about 40 miles north, but they're not ready to move yet." "Why not?" "They think he has backup, other Volkov operatives. They want to identify the whole network before they strike." Eleanor's jaw tightened. Every day they wait is a day he could disappear again. "I know. I told Patricia the same thing." Richard's voice dropped lower. "She said to tell you something. Said you'd understand." "What?" "Prague rules, whatever that means." Eleanor went very still. Prague rules, a phrase from 25 years ago, a phrase that meant only one thing. No prisoners. I understand, she said quietly. Eleanor, whatever you're planning, I'm not planning anything. She turned back to watch Brandon. I'm just teaching. That's all I've ever done. But her trembling hands had tightened into fists, and Richard knew better than to believe her. That night, Eleanor didn't go home. She drove north instead. 40 miles through winding roads past farms and forests in small towns where everyone knew everyone else's business. She drove with her headlights off for the last 10 miles, navigating by moonlight and memory. The safe house was exactly where Richard had said it would be. A farmhouse at the end of a dirt road. 2 vehicles parked outside. Lights in the windows. Eleanor pulled off the road a half-mile away and killed the engine. She sat in the darkness for a long time, her trembling hands on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on those distant lights. Shepard was in there, the man who had betrayed her team, the man who had sent 5 good people to their deaths, the man whose face she saw every night when she closed her eyes. 40 miles, a half-hour drive, close enough to walk, close enough to kill. Her hand found the pistol on the passenger seat, familiar weight, deadly promise. She could do it. Right now. Walk up to that farmhouse, kick in the door, and end 25 years of waiting. Patricia and Webb would be furious. The network would scatter. Evidence would be lost. But Shepard would be dead, and the ghosts of Prague would finally rest. Eleanor's finger found the trigger. She held that position for 3 full minutes, her breath steady, her aim ready, every instinct screaming at her to move. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Mrs. Hayes, I know it's late, but I need to talk. Something happened at the VA today. Can I call you? Eleanor stared at the message. Brandon Cole, the cruel young man who was learning to be kind, the broken person who was learning to heal, the student who needed her guidance. Her finger moved away from the trigger. She started the car, turned around, and drove back toward the city. Revenge could wait. The living couldn't. Tell me what happened, Eleanor said. They sat in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. The coffee was terrible, but it was hot, and the booth was private. Brandon looked like he hadn't slept in days. There's this veteran at the VA. His name's Robert, 83 years old, Korea and Vietnam, 2 wars, 3 Purple Hearts. Brandon's hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he was holding onto a lifeline. I've been visiting him twice a week, like you said, learning his story. And today he told me he's dying, pancreatic cancer. They caught it too late. He's got maybe 2 months. Eleanor nodded slowly. She'd seen this before. The way death moved through the VA like a slow tide, claiming veterans one by one. What did you do? Nothing. Brandon's voice cracked. I just sat there like an idiot. I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to someone telling you they're dying? You listened. That's not nothing. It felt like nothing. Brandon wiped his eyes. He told me about his wife. She died 12 years ago. Breast cancer. He said he's been waiting to see her again ever since. That dying doesn't scare him. Being alone scares him. Is he alone? His son lives in California, calls once a month maybe. His daughter passed away 10 years ago. Overdose. Brandon's jaw tightened. He gave everything to this country. 2 wars, his health, his youth, and now he's going to die alone in a VA hospital with nobody holding his hand. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. What do you want to do about it? I want to be there. Brandon looked up and there was something fierce in his eyes. When he goes, I want to be there. I don't want him to die alone. That's a big commitment. I know. Death isn't peaceful, Brandon. Not usually. It's ugly and slow and painful. It stays with you. I know. Brandon's voice was steady now. But somebody has to be there. Somebody has to witness what he gave. Somebody has to care. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. This wasn't the same person who had mocked her 4 weeks ago. That Brandon Cole would have found any excuse to avoid discomfort, to stay safe, to keep his distance from anything that might hurt. This Brandon was choosing to hurt, choosing to carry someone else's pain because it was the right thing to do. Okay, she said finally. Okay. I'll help you. We'll visit him together. And when the time comes, we'll make sure he's not alone. Brandon's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I don't know why you keep helping me. after everything I did, because that's what teachers do. Eleanor's trembling hand found his across the table. We see the person our students could become, and we help them get there. Did you have someone like that, someone who you could become? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. His name was Thompson, Master Sergeant David Thompson. He was my instructor at Fort Benning back when women weren't supposed to be snipers. Everyone else saw a mistake, a quota hire, someone who didn't belong. What did Thompson see? Potential. Eleanor's voice was soft. He said I had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen, the sharpest eyes, the coldest nerve. He said I was going to be the best shooter he'd ever trained. Was he right? Yes. No false modesty, just truth. But he also taught me something more important than shooting. He taught me that strength isn't about being harder than everyone else. It's about being strong enough to be kind. What happened to him? Eleanor's hand trembled more violently. He died. Prague, December 1999. He was on my team. Brandon's face went pale. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Nobody knows. The mission was classified. His death was classified. Everything about him is locked in files that will never see daylight. Eleanor pulled her hand back. But I remember him every day. Every shot I take, every student I train, he's there, reminding me why this matters. Is that why you became an instructor, because of him? Partly, also because I didn't know what else to do with the guilt. Eleanor's gray-blue eyes met his. I survived when he didn't. I walked out of that building when 5 people I loved didn't. And I spent years asking myself why. What made me special? What right I had to live when they died? Did you ever find an answer? No, Eleanor smiled sadly. But I found a purpose. If I couldn't save them, I could save others. I could train the next generation. I could make sure their deaths meant something by making their lessons live on. Brandon was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you saved me, because of Thompson? Partly. Eleanor stood, leaving money on the table for the coffee. But also because you remind me of him. He was arrogant too when he was young. Thought he knew everything. Treated people badly. It took someone patient to show him a better way. Who? His instructor, a woman named Martha Williams, first female sharpshooter in Army history. She saw what Thompson could become, and she helped him get there. Eleanor pulled on her jacket. The chain goes back further than any of us can trace Brandon. Teachers and students, generation after generation, each one paying forward what they received. And now I'm part of that chain. If you want to be, Brandon stood, I want to be. Then prove it, not with words, with actions. Show up for Robert, show up for the other veterans, show up for the customers who walk through that door looking lost and scared. Show up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I will. I know. Eleanor walked toward the door, then stopped. Brandon, what I told you about Prague, about Thompson, that stays between us. Of course, I mean it. Nobody else knows that story. Not Richard, not Patricia, nobody. Brandon's eyes widened slightly. He understood the weight of what she'd just given him. A secret, a vulnerability, a piece of herself she'd never shared with anyone. I won't tell anyone, he said. I promise. Eleanor nodded once, then walked out into the night. She didn't tell him about the farmhouse, about how close she'd come to throwing everything away for revenge, about the text that had pulled her back from the edge. Some things you carried alone. The next morning, Patricia Okonkwo was waiting in Eleanor's apartment. She wasn't alone. General Webb stood by the window, his face grim. 2 other operatives Eleanor didn't recognize flanked the door. The atmosphere was heavy with something that felt like accusation. You drove north last night, Patricia said without preamble. Eleanor didn't bother denying it. I wanted to see the farmhouse. You compromised the operation. I didn't go in. I didn't make contact. I sat in my car for 3 minutes and drove away. We have satellite surveillance, Eleanor. We saw your vehicle approach. If Shepard has counter surveillance, he doesn't. Eleanor's voice was sharp. I checked for electronic signatures before I got within a mile. Standard sweep. He's using old school methods. Human lookouts, physical patrols, no technology. Webb stepped forward. How do you know? Because that's how we did it in Prague. That's how Shepard was trained. He doesn't trust technology, never did. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. I know him better than anyone alive, General. That's why you need me. That's why you came to me in the first place. The room was silent. She's right, Patricia said finally. We need her expertise, but we also need her to follow protocol. I'll follow protocol when protocol makes sense. Eleanor walked to her small kitchen, putting on coffee. Her hands trembled as she measured the grounds. Right now, you're sitting on the location of the man who killed my team, and you're waiting for permission from bureaucrats who weren't born when Prague happened. We're waiting for intelligence, Webb corrected. We need to know how many operatives he has, what their capabilities are, what his extraction plan looks like. I can tell you all of that. How? Because I trained with Shepard for 3 years before Prague. I know how he thinks, how he plans, how he runs. Eleanor turned to face them. He'll have 3 to 5 people with him, ex-Soviet military, probably Spetsnaz. They'll have primary and secondary exit routes established, probably a third emergency route that only Shepard knows about. The farmhouse will have multiple sight lines cleared for defensive fire. He won't stay more than 72 hours in any single location. Webb and Patricia exchanged glances. You're certain? As certain as I've ever been about anything. Eleanor poured coffee with shaking hands. Shepard hasn't changed his methods in 25 years. That's his weakness. He's predictable because he's disciplined. And discipline becomes routine. Routine becomes pattern. Pattern becomes vulnerability. What are you proposing, Vin? Hit him tonight, before he moves again, before he realizes we're on to him. Eleanor's eyes were cold. I know the approach angles. I know the timing of his patrols. I know where his blind spots are. And you want to be on the assault team. No, Eleanor shook her head. I want to be the one who flushes him out. Let your people handle the assault. I'll handle Shepard. That's the deal. Eleanor's voice left no room for negotiation. You want my expertise. You want my knowledge. You want the best chance of ending this without losing anyone else. Then you give me Shepard. Personally. The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, Webb nodded. Tonight, 200 hours. We'll brief you on the assault plan at 1800. I'll be ready. Patricia stepped forward as Webb and his operatives moved toward the door. Eleanor, one more thing. Yes, we intercepted a communication from Shepard last night, after you left the farmhouse. He sent a coded message to someone in the city. Eleanor's blood went cold. What did it say? The ghost still walks. Begin observation. Patricia's eyes met hers. He knows you were there, and now he's watching you. Eleanor's trembling hands tightened on her coffee cup. Good, she said quietly. Let him watch. Let him think he has the upper hand. That's when predators get careless. And prey gets killed. I was never prey, Patricia. Eleanor set down the cup. Not in Prague, not now. Shepard made a mistake 25 years ago when he let me walk out of that building alive. Tonight he's going to learn exactly how big that mistake was. Patricia studied her for a long moment. You know this could be a trap. He could be baiting you. Of course it's a trap. Shepard doesn't do anything without a plan. But here's what he doesn't understand. Eleanor's gray-blue eyes were steady despite her trembling hands. Traps only work when the target doesn't know they're walking into one. I know. And I'm walking in anyway. Because some debts aren't worth any price. Even your life. I've been living on borrowed time since Prague. Every day since then has been a gift I didn't earn. Eleanor walked Patricia to the door. If tonight is when I pay that debt, then so be it. At least I'll pay it on my terms. Patricia paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, I hope you survive this. For what it's worth, so do I. Eleanor managed a small smile. But if I don't tell Richard to keep the training program running, and tell Brandon he's ready to teach on his own, tell them yourself, tomorrow morning. If there is a tomorrow morning. Patricia left without another word. Eleanor stood alone in her apartment, the weight of 25 years pressing down on her shoulders. Tonight, after all this time, after all the waiting, after all the ghosts and guilt and sleepless nights, tonight it would finally end. She walked to her bedroom closet and pulled out a case she hadn't opened in years. Inside was her old service rifle, the one she'd used at Fort Benning, the one Thompson had given her the day she completed training. For when the time comes, he'd said. You'll know when. Eleanor's trembling hands lifted the rifle from its case, ran along the familiar stock, checked the action with movements burned into muscle memory. The time had come. Her phone buzzed, a text from Brandon. Mrs. Hayes, I'm at the VA with Robert. He asked me to read to him. Any book recommendations? Eleanor stared at the message for a long moment. Life and death, future and past, hope and revenge. All of it tangled together in a single moment. She typed a reply, read him anything with a happy ending. He's earned that much. Then she set down the phone and began preparing for war. At 1800 hours, Eleanor sat in a secure briefing room with Webb Patricia and 6 assault team members. Maps spread across the table, satellite imagery on the screens. Every detail of the farmhouse analyzed and planned. At 2000 hours, she ate a meal she didn't taste her mind already at the farmhouse. At 2200 hours, she dressed in black tactical gear that fit her body like a second skin despite the tremor in her hands. At 2345 hours, she climbed into the back of an unmarked van with the assault team, her rifle across her knees. At 0147 hours, they reached the staging point. A half-mile from the farmhouse, the same spot where Eleanor had parked 2 nights before. At 155 hours, the team moved out. Silent shadows in the moonlight. At 0200 hours, exactly everything went wrong. The farmhouse exploded. Not from inside, from outside. Multiple charges planted along the perimeter, detonating in sequence. The assault team scattered, taking cover, returning fire against enemies they couldn't see. Eleanor didn't scatter. She moved forward, through the smoke, through the chaos, through the screaming and the gunfire and the death, because she knew. She understood. Shepard wasn't in the farmhouse. He'd never been in the farmhouse. The safe house was a decoy, a trap, a way to draw out the people hunting him and eliminate them all at once. But Eleanor had trained Shepard. She knew his patterns, his methods, his weaknesses, and she knew exactly where he would be watching from. The hill to the east, high ground, perfect sight lines, the same position she would have chosen if she were running this operation. Eleanor ran, her trembling legs pumping, her shaking hands steady on her rifle, 67 years old and moving like she was 30 again. She crested the hill just as Shepard turned to face her. He looked older, gray where he'd been dark, lined where he'd been smooth. But those eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, they hadn't changed at all. Hello, Eleanor, he said. His rifle was already raised, pointed directly at her heart. Hello, Shepard. They stood like that for a long moment. 2 old soldiers, 2 former friends, 2 people who had chosen different paths and ended up here on a hill overlooking death and fire. You knew, Shepard said. You knew the farmhouse was a trap. I trained with you for 3 years. You think I don't know how you operate? Then why come? You could have stayed safe, let the others take the fall. Because I made a promise. Eleanor's trembling hands held her rifle steady. 25 years ago, to Thompson, to Chen, to Williams and Kowalski and Martinez, I promised them I would find you. I promised them I would make you pay. Shepard's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. You always were sentimental. That was your weakness. And you never were. That was yours. Below them, the gunfire was slowing. Eleanor didn't know who was winning, didn't care. Everything had narrowed to this moment, this hill, this man. I'm going to kill you, Shepard. You can trick Shui. His finger tightened on his trigger. But my rifle is already aimed. Yours isn't. By the time you bring it up, you'll be dead. Maybe. Eleanor's gray-blue eyes met his. But you forgot something. What? I was never the best shooter on our team. Thompson was, Chen was, but I was always the best at reading people, at knowing what they would do before they did it. She smiled. And I know you, Shepard, better than you know yourself. You know nothing. I know you won't shoot me, not yet, because you need to know something first. You need to know how I survived Prague. You need to know why I was the one who walked out when everyone else died. Shepard's finger hesitated on the trigger. It's been eating at you for 25 years, Eleanor continued. I can see it in your eyes, the question you've never been able to answer. Why her? Why did she live? Enlighten me. Because you let me. Eleanor's smile widened. You had a clear shot at me that night. I know you did. I saw you through the window before the explosion. You were in position. You had me dead to rights, but you didn't pull the trigger. Shepard's face went still. Why, Eleanor asked. Why did you let me live? The silence stretched between them, and in that silence Eleanor moved. Not toward Shepard, not away, down, dropping to one knee, rifle coming up, finger finding the trigger, all in one fluid motion that her body remembered even when her mind had forgotten. Shepard fired. The bullet passed through the space where Eleanor's head had been a fraction of a second before. Eleanor fired. Shepard stumbled backward, his rifle falling from his hands, a dark stain spreading across his chest. He looked down at the wound, then up at Eleanor. His expression was almost surprised. You were never that fast, he said. I wasn't. Eleanor rose to her feet, rifle still aimed at his heart. But you hesitated, just like you hesitated in Prague, just like I knew you would. Shepard sank to his knees. His breathing was ragged now, wet. Why? Eleanor asked again. Why did you let me live? Shepard coughed, blood on his lips. Because I loved you, Eleanor, back then. Before everything went wrong, I couldn't kill you, not even when they ordered me to. Eleanor stared at him. Of all the answers she'd imagined, all the explanations she'd constructed over 25 years, she'd never considered this one. You betrayed our team, got them killed, because you loved me. I betrayed them because I had no choice. The Volkovs had my family, my mother, my sister. Shepard's voice was fading. But I couldn't kill you. That was the one line I wouldn't cross. Eleanor knelt beside him. Her trembling hands set down the rifle. Your family is dead, Shepard. The Volkovs killed them anyway. 6 months after Prague. Something broke in his eyes, the last light of hope extinguished. I know, he whispered. I've known for 24 years, and every day since then I've wished you had killed me in Prague. Would have been cleaner than living with what I became. His hand found hers, cold now, weak. Do it, he said. Finish it. Give me the peace I couldn't earn. Eleanor looked at the man who had been her partner, her friend, her betrayer, the architect of her nightmares, and the ghost she could never escape. She picked up her rifle. She pressed the barrel against his heart, and she hesitated. Do it, Shepard repeated. His voice was barely a whisper now. Please let it end. Eleanor's finger found the trigger. She thought about Thompson, about the team she'd lost, about 25 years of guilt and rage and sleepless nights. She thought about Brandon, about second chances, about strength being kind. She thought about mercy. Her finger tightened, then released. No, she said. Shepard's eyes widened. What? You don't get to choose how this ends. Eleanor stood lowering her rifle. You don't get the easy way out. You're going to live. You're going to stand trial. You're going to face every family who lost someone because of what you did. I'll die before trial. The wound is survivable. Lung shot, not heart. You've got maybe 20 minutes before you bleed out. Eleanor pulled out her phone. And the medevac team is 3 minutes away. She dialed. Shepard stared at her with something that might have been horror or gratitude or both. Why? He asked. Why not end it? Because Thompson wouldn't want me to. Eleanor's voice was soft. He believed in justice, in accountability, in making people face what they'd done. She looked down at Shepard. You're going to live with your choices. Every day, for whatever time you have left. That's worse than death, and you know it. The helicopter appeared over the horizon, lights blazing. Rescue coming. Eleanor walked away from the man she'd spent 25 years hating. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her heart was steady. For the first time since Prague, the ghosts were silent. The helicopter lifted Shepard into the night sky, and Eleanor watched it disappear until the lights were just another star among thousands. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from the cold, not from fear, from something else entirely. Something that felt like relief and grief and exhaustion all tangled together into a knot she couldn't untie. Patricia found her still standing on that hill 20 minutes later. It's over, Patricia said. No, Eleanor's voice was hollow. It's just beginning, for him, for me, for everyone who has to live with what happened tonight. The assault team lost 2 men, 4 wounded, but the Volkov operatives are either dead or captured. Patricia paused. You saved lives tonight, Eleanor. If you hadn't figured out the trap, I should have figured it out sooner. Should have known Shepard would never make it that easy. You're being too hard on yourself. I'm being honest. Eleanor finally turned to face her. Blood on her tactical gear, dirt on her face. 77 years old and looking every single day of it. Take me home, Patricia. I need to sleep. The debrief can wait until morning. I've given enough tonight. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded. The drive back to the city took 2 hours. Eleanor didn't speak, didn't sleep, just stared out the window at the darkness rushing past her mind, replaying the moment on the hill over and over again. Shepard's face when she'd said no, the confusion, the desperation, the terrible hope that maybe, just maybe, death would finally free him from what he'd become. She denied him that freedom, made him face his choices, made him live with the consequences. Was that mercy or cruelty? Eleanor honestly didn't know anymore. Her apartment was dark when she arrived. She didn't turn on the lights, just sat in her worn armchair, her trembling hands folded in her lap, and waited for morning. It came slowly, gray light creeping through the windows, the sounds of the city waking up. Cars and voices and life continuing like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Her phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m., a text from Brandon. Mrs. Hayes, Robert passed away last night. I was with him. He wasn't alone. Eleanor stared at the message for a long time. Life and death, endings and beginnings. The wheel turning, always turning. She typed back. I'm proud of you. Come to the store at 9. We need to talk. Then she got up, made coffee with her trembling hands, and began preparing for the next chapter. Brandon was waiting outside Summit Arms when Eleanor arrived. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped, but there was something in his posture that hadn't been there before. A weight, a gravity, the mark of someone who had witnessed death and been changed by it. Tell me about it, Eleanor said. They sat on the same bench where Brandon had broken down weeks ago. The morning was cold, but neither of them seemed to notice. He was awake until the end, Brandon said quietly, talking about his wife, about the life they'd built together, about the things he wished he had done differently. What did he wish? That he'd told people he loved them more, that he'd spent less time working and more time living, that he'd been kinder to strangers. Brandon's voice cracked. He said the only thing that mattered in the end was the kindness you left behind. Everything else fades. Eleanor nodded slowly. He was right. I held his hand when he went. It was peaceful, like falling asleep. Brandon wiped his eyes. I didn't think I could do it. Didn't think I was strong enough. But you were right. Showing up is the hardest part. Once you're there, you just do what needs to be done. That's true of most things in life. They sat in silence for a moment. Something happened to you last night, Brandon said. I can see it. You look different. Eleanor almost smiled. I confronted a ghost, someone from my past who I've been running from for 25 years. What happened? I had the chance to kill him, to end it, to get revenge for everything he took from me. Eleanor's trembling hands found each other in her lap. I didn't take it. Brandon turned to face her fully. Why not? Because revenge doesn't heal anything. It just creates more wounds. Eleanor met his eyes. I spent 25 years dreaming about that moment, planning it, rehearsing it, and when it finally came, I realized that killing him wouldn't bring back the people I lost, wouldn't fill the emptiness, wouldn't make anything better. So what did you do? I let him live, to face trial, to face the families of everyone he hurt, to spend whatever time he has left living with what he did. Eleanor's voice hardened slightly. Death would have been an escape. Living is the punishment. Brandon was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I could have done that, he finally said. Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you think. Eleanor stood her knees protesting. Now we have work to do. The training program doesn't stop because I had a long night. You're still going to teach after everything, especially after everything. Eleanor looked down at him. That's what we do, Brandon. We keep going, we keep teaching, we keep passing on what we've learned to the next generation, because that's how the world changes. Not through revenge or violence or hatred, through education, through patience, through the slow, steady work of making people better than they were. Brandon stood to join her. Robert said something else before he died, he said quietly. What? He said he could tell I was going to be a good man, that he could see it in me. Brandon's voice broke. Nobody ever told me that before. Nobody ever looked at me and saw anything worth believing in. Eleanor's trembling hand found his shoulder. I saw it. The moment you broke down in the rain, the moment you admitted you were scared, the moment you chose to change. She squeezed gently. Robert was right. You are going to be a good man. You already are. Brandon's tears fell freely. He didn't try to hide them. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for not giving up on me. Thank me by not giving up on yourself. Thank me by passing it on. Every person you help, every customer you treat with respect, every veteran you visit, that's my thank you. That's how you repay a teacher. They walked into Summit Arms together. The store was already buzzing with activity, employees preparing for the day, customers browsing, life continuing. James met them at the door, his face grave. Eleanor, there's someone here to see you, in the training room. Who? Richard, and some people from Washington. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. I see. Brandon, start the morning briefing without me. Cover the observation exercises we practiced last week. Are you okay? I will be. She walked toward the training room, her orthopedic shoes silent on the polished floor. Richard was waiting with Patricia General Webb and two people Eleanor didn't recognize. A man and a woman, both in expensive suits, both carrying the unmistakable air of government authority. Eleanor, Richard said, these are Deputy Director Morrison and Special Counsel Chen. They're here about last night. Eleanor sat down across from them, her trembling hands folded on the table. I assume you want a debriefing. We've already been briefed by General Webb, the woman Chen said. What we want to discuss is your future. My future. Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, what you did last night was extraordinary. You identified the trap. You located Shepard. You neutralized him without lethal force, preserving him for interrogation and trial. The intelligence we've already gathered from his capture has exposed 3 other Volkov cells operating in Europe. I was doing my job. You were doing far more than that. Chen pulled out a folder. We'd like to offer you a position, official this time, consultant to the Department of Defense on counterintelligence training. Your methods, your insights, your experience, they're too valuable to waste on a gun store training program. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. With respect, she finally said, I'll decline. The government officials exchanged glances. The compensation, Morrison started, isn't the issue. Eleanor's voice was firm. I spent 40 years in your world, training your people, fighting your wars, carrying your secrets. I gave everything I had, and it cost me more than you can imagine. She gestured around the room. This is where I belong now, teaching civilians, training store employees, making small differences in ordinary lives. Her gray-blue eyes met Chen's. That might seem like a step down to you, but to me it's the most important work I've ever done. Mrs. Hayes, I'm done with shadows, done with classified missions and black ops and enemies who never stay dead. Eleanor stood. I want to teach people how to see each other, how to treat each other with dignity, how to be kind to strangers. That's my mission now, and it's not negotiable. Richard was smiling. Patricia looked proud. Webb's expression was unreadable. Morrison and Chen exchanged another glance. Very well, Chen said finally, but the offer stands. If you ever rush or change, I'm awesome. I won't. Eleanor walked to the door, then paused. But there is something you can do for me. Name it. The families of my team, Thompson, Chen, Williams, Kowalski, Martinez. They deserve to know what happened. The real story, not the sanitized version in the official files. That information is classified, then unclassify it. Eleanor's voice was steel. They've waited 25 years to know how their loved ones died. They deserve the truth, all of it, including Shepard's betrayal. The silence stretched. I'll see what I can saw, Morrison said finally. Say that you do. Eleanor walked out without looking back. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of training sessions and customer interactions and the thousand small tasks that made up daily life at Summit Arms. Brandon ran the observation exercises with growing confidence. The employees practiced seeing customers as people instead of categories. James managed operations with quiet efficiency, and Eleanor watched it all with a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. The ghosts were still there. The memories. The weight of everything she'd done and everything she'd lost. But underneath all of that, for the first time since Prague, there was peace. At noon, Tyler Morrison walked through the door. He was carrying a worn leather album. The same album his mother had shown him weeks ago, filled with photographs of his grandmother, Ruth. Mrs. Hayes, do you have a minute? They sat in the break room, the album open between them. I've been doing what you said, Tyler explained, learning about my grandmother, talking to other veterans, trying to understand. What have you learned? That I was blind. Tyler's voice was thick with emotion. My whole life I saw her as just Grandma, sweet old lady who made cookies and told stories. I never asked about Vietnam, never wondered about her trembling hands, never thought about what she might have sacrificed. He turned to a page in the album. A young woman in army fatigues standing in front of a helicopter, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She saved 47 lives, Tyler said. 47 soldiers who came through her surgical unit. I've found one of them, 81 years old now, lives in Ohio. He told me my grandmother worked for 36 hours straight during the Tet Offensive. Wouldn't leave her post even when the rockets were falling. Eleanor looked at the photograph, another woman like her, another hidden hero. What are you going to do with this? I'm writing a book. Tyler closed the album carefully. About her, about all the women who served and were forgotten. The nurses and technicians and support staff who never got medals or recognition but kept the whole thing running. That's a big project. I know, but it matters. Their stories matter. Tyler met her eyes. You taught me that the day you made those shots, the day you showed us that strength doesn't always look strong. Eleanor's trembling hands found the edge of the album. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Tyler. I hope so. He stood to leave. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, for everything. Thank me by telling their stories. All of them. The ones who survived and the ones who didn't. The ones who came home whole and the ones who came home broken. They all deserve to be remembered. Tyler nodded once, then walked out carrying his grandmother's legacy. Eleanor sat alone in the break room for a long time looking at the empty space where the album had been. Generation to generation, teacher to student, story to story. That was how change happened. Not in dramatic battles or explosive confrontations, in quiet moments of connection, in people learning to see each other, in the slow accumulation of kindness that eventually became a flood. The afternoon brought another surprise. The woman in athleisure walked through the door, the same woman who had filmed Eleanor's humiliation weeks ago, the same woman whose live stream had gone viral, then transformed into something unexpected. She looked different now, humbler, softer around the edges. Mrs. Hayes, can we talk? They sat in the same spot where Eleanor had trained Brandon. My name is Jessica, the woman said. Jessica Palmer. I never properly introduced myself. I was too busy being a terrible person. What brings you back? This. Jessica pulled out her phone, scrolling to a video. After everything that happened, I kept the footage, edited it, posted it with the real story. What you did, who you are, the lesson you taught all of us. She showed Eleanor the screen. 32 million views, comments from around the world. It went viral, but not as a joke, as an inspiration. Jessica's eyes were wet. People are sharing their own stories. Veterans talking about what they survived. Elderly people sharing their accomplishments. Families discovering hidden heroes in their own histories. Eleanor stared at the numbers. 32 million. I didn't expect this, she said quietly. Neither did I, but it made me realize something is... Jessica put away her phone. I've spent my whole life judging people, building a brand on mockery and drama, and making fun of people who seemed like easy targets. And then you showed me what that looks like from the other side. What do you want, Jessica? To do better, to be better. Jessica leaned forward. I want to use my platform for something that matters. I want to tell stories like yours. Stories about people who are underestimated, people who carry hidden strength, people who deserve to be seen. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. That's a nice speech, but speeches are easy. Actions are hard. I know, that's why I'm here, to ask for your help. Jessica's voice was earnest now, stripped of the polished persona. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be kind. I've spent so long being cruel that I don't even know where to start. You start by showing up, same as everyone else. How Brandon runs a volunteer group at the VA hospital now, every Saturday. They need people to listen to veterans, to hear their stories, to see them. Eleanor's gray-blue eyes held Jessica's. That's where kindness begins, in the act of truly seeing another person. And you think I can do that? I think anyone can do that. The question is whether you will. Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Saturday, she finally said. I'll be there. Good. Eleanor stood. Don't be late, and leave the phone in the car. This isn't content. It's life. Jessica nodded and left. Eleanor watched her go, then turned to find Brandon standing in the doorway. Did you hear that? She asked. Most of it. Brandon's expression was thoughtful. You think she'll actually show up? I don't know, but she deserves the chance to try. Like I did. Like everyone does. The day wound down. Employees went home. Customers trickled out. The store grew quiet. Richard found Eleanor in the training room organizing materials for tomorrow's session. Long day, he said. Long month, long year, long life. Eleanor's trembling hands stacked papers with practiced efficiency. But a good one, despite everything. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask, I might not answer. Do you regret it? In any of it, the service, the training, the secrets, the sacrifices. Eleanor set down the papers. I regret the people I couldn't save, the students who didn't come home, the years I spent running from ghosts instead of facing them. She turned to face him. But the work itself, teaching people to be better, helping them find strength they didn't know they had. No, I don't regret that. Not for a second. Even now at 67 with everything you've been through. Especially now. Eleanor's gray-blue eyes were clear. When you're young, you think strength is about power, about winning, about being harder than everyone else. But when you get old, you realize the truth. Strength is about endurance, about showing up day after day, about choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. She gathered the last of her materials. I'm not the same person I was at Fort Benning. Not the same person who walked out of Prague. Not even the same person who walked into this store a month ago. Her trembling hands found his shoulder. But I'm still teaching, still fighting, still believing that people can change. And if they can't, then I'll die trying to prove otherwise. Eleanor smiled. That's not failure, Richard. That's faith. She walked out of Summit Arms into the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The city hummed with life around her, cars and people, and the endless motion of humanity going about its business. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Shepard's trial date set for March. The families have been notified. They want to meet you. Eleanor stared at the message. Thompson's family, Chen's family, Williams and Kowalski and Martinez. The people who had waited 25 years for answers. She typed back, set it up, I'll be there. Another message, this one from Brandon. Jessica showed up at the VA today, 3 days early, said she couldn't wait until Saturday. She spent 4 hours listening to veterans. Cried the whole time. Eleanor smiled. Change. Real change. Happening one person at a time. She drove home through familiar streets, past the diner where she'd sat with Brandon, past the VA hospital where Robert had died with someone holding his hand, past Summit Arms where a cruel young man had mocked an old woman and been transformed by her grace. Her apartment was quiet when she arrived, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a home, a place where a woman with trembling hands had finally found peace. She made tea, sat by the window, watched the last light fade from the sky, Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to make a difference. The work was never done. The wheel never stopped turning. But tonight Eleanor Hayes rested. Her hands trembled against the warm ceramic of her cup. They always would. The nerve damage was permanent. The scars were forever. But her aim remained true. Her resolve remained steady. Her legacy grew with every person she touched. 3,000 snipers trained at Fort Benning. A young man named Brandon learning to be kind. A social media influencer discovering empathy. A grandson writing his grandmother's story. A CEO remembering the woman who saved his life. A traitor facing justice instead of the easy escape of death. Ripples spreading outward from a single stone dropped into still water. That was how the world changed. Not through grand gestures or dramatic victories, through small acts of courage, through daily choices to see others clearly, through the stubborn refusal to give up on people even when they'd given up on themselves. Eleanor Hayes had spent 40 years as a weapon, training killers, creating soldiers, serving a country that asked everything and offered little in return. Now she was something different, something more. A teacher, a healer, a bridge between past and future. The trembling in her hands was constant now, the rhythm of a life lived in service, the mark of battles fought and prices paid. But those hands had also reached out in mercy when vengeance would have been easier, had lifted up a broken young man when condemnation would have been justified, had passed on lessons that would echo through generations she would never see. Some soldiers never leave the battlefield, but Eleanor Hayes had learned something that all the training in the world couldn't teach. The greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's becoming someone worth being. She finished her tea, set down the cup, and closed her eyes. Outside, the world continued its endless turning. People lived and dished out and loved and hated and hurt each other in ways large and small. Tomorrow would bring fresh struggles and new opportunities for both cruelty and kindness. But tonight, in a modest apartment in a city that didn't know or care about the legendary gray ghost, an old woman with trembling hands slept peacefully for the first time in 25 years. The ghosts of Prague were finally silent, and the legacy she'd built would outlast them all. Because that's what strength really means. Not the power to destroy, the courage to create, not the ability to take life, the wisdom to change it. Eleanor Hayes had been a soldier, a sniper, a trainer of killers, and a haunted survivor. Now she was simply a teacher, and that was enough. That was everything. Some people walk into our lives and leave footprints on our hearts. Others walk into gun stores with trembling hands and teach us that strength has nothing to do with steadiness and everything to do with the courage to keep showing up day after day, despite every reason to quit. To the veterans who served in silence, to the teachers who believed when no one else would, to the strangers who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. This story was for you. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the person who looks weakest might just be the strongest in the room. You never know what battles someone has already won.